Discovered my husband's affair with his A-sistant in our own bed, rejected his pleas for therapy, and reignited an old flame. So, I'm a 37-year-old woman, and this is the story of how my now ex, Bill, he's 40, and I came together and eventually fell apart. We fell in love, got married almost 9 years ago, and celebrated with a modest but beautiful ceremony. For most of our marriage, things were decent, at least until everything started unraveling. We had agreed on an open marriage with certain ground rules, and we mostly kept our finances separate, but money would still pass between us when needed, usually me supporting Bill. Despite my steady income, thanks to my parents, enough to pull in close to 3 times the minimum wage each month, we found ourselves snowballing into debt. Both our credit cards were maxed, debit accounts overdrawn, and we juggled multiple bank loans. The tap of debt was left wide open by Bill's struggling business. To try and keep us afloat, I worked a part-time job to supplement my parents' support, but that wasn't enough. In the end, I scored a full-time job, doubling my previous wages and pulling in nearly 5x minimum wage every month, just to keep our heads above water, while Bill's business continued to sputter. The catch? My new job came with a grueling commute from our home, so I made a hard choice: spend 6 days a week at my parents' house, cutting my travel time in half, and only head home on my days off. Bill ran his business right out of our garage, essentially working from home, so he could match his days off to mine. We somehow made it work. He'd always socialize when I was gone, inviting friends over, sometimes letting them crash in our guest bedroom. There was one friend in particular, Agatha, 25F, who worked for Bill during busy seasons and treated him like her older brother. Bill treated her like his little sister, so, seeing her sleep over initially didn't raise any alarms for me. But as time ticked on, suspicion gnawed at me. It got to the point where I had to confront it head on. I asked Bill if anything was happening between him and Agatha. He denied it instantly. I told him I'd take him at his word, and I wasn't going to play detective or try to trap him in a lie. But then he asked me, what if something had happened? If anything did, I told him, he'd break all 3 of our rules, and he'd have to end things with her right away and agree to counseling. He looked at me and asked, what if I don't want to stop seeing her? My heart clenched as I replied, then we'd need to get a divorce. Looking back, I can't believe how blind I was to those blazing red flags in that moment, but exhaustion from the night shift had sapped my fight. I just went to bed. When I woke, I found Bill at the foot of our bed, sobbing. The minute I stirred, he declared it was confession time. He admitted he and Agatha had been having an affair right there in our home, in our bed, for a month. He told me he didn't want to stop seeing her, she made him feel good about himself. I reminded him of what that meant: if he wouldn't end things with her, we'd have to divorce. He asked for some time to think it over, and I agreed. That night was surreal. We ate dinner, watched a movie, acted like everything was fine, and Bill went to bed. The next morning, over our coffee, Bill told me he'd made his decision. He said I was his life partner, he was all in. We had a strangely pleasant morning before I headed to bed again ahead of another night shift. When I woke, Bill wasn't home. I called. He said he was at his brother's with their dad, talking things over, and would be home late, no need to wait up. Later, I called again at work, asking how things went. That's when he told me, over the phone, at work, after talking to his family, he decided he wanted a divorce. I'm not proud of how I reacted initially. I lashed out, furious and betrayed that he'd do this to me, and over the phone, no less. After a while, my anger burned out. I pointed out to him that he'd changed his mind 3 times in 24 hours, first stalling, then recommitting, then dumping me. I told him there was no way he was making a healthy choice, given he was clearly in the middle of a crisis. I insisted he see a therapist ASAP for individual counseling, and that we should start couples counseling soon after. He refused, resolute that his mind was made up, afraid he'd give me false hope by agreeing. I told him if I got my hopes up, that was on me, not him, but insisted he needed therapy to be sure this was right. For 2 weeks, he dodged making that therapy appointment, which honestly gave me the time and space to reflect on our marriage and how I truly felt about divorce. This is where everything pivoted for me. When I did a thought experiment, picturing my life as a divorced woman, I realized that the idea of being alone brought me far more peace than anything I had experienced with him. For years, I'd been the one begging for love while he distanced himself from me, avoided me, for half a decade or more. I was exhausted. So, after he finally saw a therapist and she confirmed everything I'd suspected, that he was in full-blown crisis, maybe even a nervous breakdown, I told him. I had made my decision, as well, I wanted a divorce, too. And that was it. Within weeks, in less than a month of his telling me about the affair, I boxed up my entire life, little by little, moved out, and we filed. It was done. On a trusted family friend's legal advice, I went for a no-fault divorce. We asked nothing of each other. That meant all the debt I racked up for Bill's failing business would haunt me. I wouldn't see a penny of it back. But I realized that being free of him outweighed a bitter, drawn-out fight over money he didn't even have. There are so many moments and conversations I'm skipping over. Arguments about whether the cheating was really the reason for the divorce, times I told him he would regret his decision, probably not now, but in 5 years, I warned him, and he just laughed. So I embraced my new life as a single woman. I swore off dating for a while to my friends, promising them I'd make a spectacular comeback as a cougar after 40. But then, well, that's when Adam found out I was. I'm divorced now. Adam was an old situationship of mine, back from about 13 years ago, when I was living in a totally different city. Neither of us wanted anything serious back then, but there was a connection there, something undeniable that we both felt. We agreed on a friends with benefits arrangement, a non-monogamous one. It ended only because I decided to move to the city I call home now. We parted amicably, just friends, and over the years, our contact dwindled to nothing more than the occasional funny meme and a how's life message, especially once I got married. After my divorce, Adam reached out almost immediately and asked if he could video call me. Once the small talk was out of the way, he got right to the heart of it. He apologized for everything he thought was his fault in our story 13 years ago, even letting me go. Then he told me things I never knew, like how his best friend would still tease him about me all these years later, shutting him down in debates by bringing me up. He confessed that after I left, he had looked for me in every woman he met, one because she was tan like me, another because she was tall like me, another because she had similar eyes, and none of them were quite right. After all this time, he told me he still believed I was his soulmate, the one who got away, and that he was still undeniably in love with me. And I admitted, the feeling was mutual. When I fought with Bill, and he would say something really mean or rude, my first thought, again and again, was, Adam would never have said something like that to me, not even in a fight. So Adam and I decided to give long distance a shot. That was almost 4 months ago. Every day since then has been better than the last, even being apart. We won't be long distance for much longer, we plan to end that soon. We're talking about getting married before the year is out, and I'll move to where he is now. I don't want to give too many details about Adam and me, just in case Bill ever stumbles across this and recognizes our story. On my end, I've been making actual progress with the debt. I've already paid off nearly half, and I should be debt-free by early summer. Adam even offered to pay it off for me, but I insisted, this is something I have to do myself. It feels like penance for falling for Bill's lies and manipulation, but more importantly, it's about proving to myself that, contrary to what Bill used to say, I can budget, and I can budget well. I wasn't planning on posting an update yet, but the last 2 weeks have been such a whiplash of closure, chaos, and genuinely good news that it feels like the story turned another corner on its own. It started with a certified letter on a Tuesday, my name, my old address, and 3 letters no one wants to see in bold, IRS. My stomach dropped. I opened it in my car, hands shaking, and read that there were discrepancies on last year's return from self-employment income and business expenses tied to my former spouse. We filed jointly. I could feel that old panic bubbling up, the same feeling I had when I was covering overdrafts at 2 a.m., but this time I didn't spiral. I drove home, called a free legal clinic my dad's friend recommended, and within 48 hours I was on Zoom with a tax attorney who walked me through innocent spouse relief. I had never heard of it. I gathered everything, the bank statements, the invoices, the ridiculous team-building dinners he'd expensed that were actually brewery tours with his friends. I wrote a statement. I filed the form. It's not resolved yet. These things take months, but the immediate collection actions are paused while they look at my case, and the attorney told me, calmly and without a trace of condescension, that I'd done everything right. I hung up and cried from relief in the bathroom, then went back to work like a normal person because life insists on continuing. 2 days later, Agatha texted me. We hadn't spoken since I moved out. Her message was simple, can we talk? I owe you an apology. We met in a quiet coffee shop. She looked about 10 years older than the last time I saw her, and I say that with compassion. She didn't make eye contact at first. She told me she was sorry, truly sorry, and that she should have known better, but she didn't know than what she knows now. She said he'd told her I'd checked out long before, that I didn't like him anymore, that we were basically separated in all but paperwork. She believed him. Then, while they were together, she found out about 2 other women he was messaging, both local, one of them someone who'd also crashed in our guest room when I was out of town. She said it with a sort of hollow laugh and then she cried. She told me she was done. She was moving back in with her sister. She wanted me to have my old wedding china back if I wanted it. He'd kept it in a box in the garage and she said it felt wrong seeing it there. I told her she could keep it or smash it or sell it. I didn't want it. We sat there for an hour, 2 women who had both been lied to, and by the time we hugged goodbye, I didn't feel anger toward her anymore. I felt sad for both of us, and then I felt free of even that. That same night, Bill called. I let it go to voicemail. He left a 5-minute message that was just a flood. He said he was sorry and that he'd messed up the best thing that ever happened to him, that he hadn't been sleeping, that he'd started seeing the therapist again. He said he didn't expect anything from me, he just wanted me to hear him say the words. He also asked, casually, like it was nothing, if I could help make sense of the IRS thing because he didn't really remember what he'd filed. I listened to all of it in one sitting, deleted it, and sent him one single text, please direct any tax questions to your preparer or the IRS. I have filed for relief. I wish you the best in therapy. Then I blocked his number. It didn't feel dramatic. It felt like setting down a box I'd been holding for too long. The good part starts here. Adam was supposed to come out at the end of next month for a long weekend, but when I told him about the IRS letter, he didn't even hesitate. He changed his flight to the next day and showed up on my parents' porch with a carry-on and a bouquet he'd picked up at the airport kiosk, the kind that comes wrapped in plastic with those little droplets on the petals. My mom opened the door and just started laughing, the kind of laugh that happens when timing starts to feel like a joke the universe is telling in your favor. Adam hugged my dad like they'd known each other forever. Later, as we were cleaning up after dinner, I watched him and my father argue about whether to use plumber's tape or replace the washer on the leaky kitchen faucet and felt this quiet settling in my chest. I don't know how else to describe it except to say it felt like a brand new house in my heart where everything worked. We didn't plan this next part. On Friday, I made the last payment on the last credit card. I did it on my phone in the parking lot outside the grocery store, and the confirmation email landed in my inbox with its cold little paid in full. I took a screenshot. I sent it to Adam. He was in the dairy aisle holding a carton of eggs. He looked at the picture, looked back at me, put the eggs in the cart, and said, very quietly, "Come outside with me for a second." We walked to the edge of the lot where there's a line of maple trees my town planted 10 years ago, and he pulled a ring out of his pocket, simple gold band, small sapphire in the middle, and said, "No speeches, I promise. Just, will you marry me? Not someday. Now." I said yes. I think I said it twice. When we told my parents at dinner, my mom cried, my dad clapped Adam on the back so hard he winced, and then my mother produced a bottle of champagne she just happened to have and we drank it from mismatched juice glasses because all the flutes are still somewhere in a box with my winter scarves. We went to the courthouse on Monday to get the license and we walked out married. It was just the two of us and my parents as witnesses because that is what felt right. The clerk congratulated us like she meant it. We took a photo on the steps that is no one's idea of a Pinterest wedding and I cannot stop looking at it. We'll do a celebration later when we have time to gather the people we love, but I love the way it felt to start our marriage with a signature and a promise instead of a performance. The wild part is that the timestamp on our marriage certificate is the same hour as the timestamp on the confirmation email that my last debt cleared from their system. If I believed in omens, I'd frame those two pieces of paper together. I told my boss that afternoon. I expected her to raise an eyebrow at the suddenness, but she hugged me. Then she told me there's a position opening in our company's sister branch in Adams City that she'd been thinking of sending me a feeler about. Anyway, I applied, I interviewed, and I got the offer yesterday morning. It's a lateral move with a remote option 2 days a week and a commute that involves trees instead of interstates. I signed the offer. I gave notice at my part-time. My parents booked a U-Haul before I could talk myself out of how fast everything is happening. There's one more small, strange piece of closure. I drove to the old house to pick up a few boxes I'd stored in the attic, the last bits of my life I hadn't wanted to face. Bill wasn't there. The garage was empty in that particular way that tells you someone moved out fast. On the kitchen counter, under a magnet shaped like a chili pepper we bought on our honeymoon, there was a white envelope with my name written in his printing. Inside was the check for half the last electric bill and a note that just said, "I'm trying." I left the magnet, locked the door, and dropped the key through the mail slot. No ceremony. No speech, just an ending that landed softly instead of shattering. Adam and I are leaving in 2 weeks. We're going to take the long way, cut south to avoid a storm front my dad insists is going to make the highway miserable. We'll stop at the little diner in the next state that serves pancakes the size of frisbees and play 20 questions like we did 13 years ago when I thought I was too young for a soulmate and he was patient enough to let me figure myself out. I am not naive about marriage anymore. I know what it asks of you. But the difference this time is that I'm stepping into it sober, no fantasies, no bargains, no bleeding to make up for someone else's wounds. Just two people choosing each other on a Monday afternoon with a clerk as witness and the rest of our lives feeling, for the first time in a long time, like something I get to build on purpose. We left on a Thursday with the U-Haul whining like a chorus of mosquitoes and my dad waving from the driveway until we turned the corner. We cut south, like he told us to, chasing a thin ribbon of blue sky along the back roads while the storm stomped along the interstate to our left. We stopped at the diner with the frisbee pancakes, and the same waitress from 13 years ago slid 2 mugs toward us and squinted at Adam. 20 questions, she said, like a nickname. He laughed so hard he almost knocked his coffee over. I made him tell her we'd finally figured it out. She put a slice of pie on our ticket and didn't write it down. Just past state line, we saw a dog. That's how it felt, like the highway just produced him out of heat shimmer and Queen Anne's lace. He was a brown and white mutt with one ear that wouldn't commit to up or down, trotting along the shoulder with a look on his face like he was late. Adam pulled over without a word. The dog trotted to him and sat like he'd been waiting for someone to remember manners. No collar, no chip, a belly that told me he'd charmed more than one gas station attendant into handing over a hot dog. We put him in the cab and he put his head in my lap inside. We tried the local shelter. Full. We posted on a lost and found page and got a chorus of "not mine but good boy." It was already dusk. We named him Pepper because the magnet in my palm had been red and because he sneezed when he stuck his whole nose in the bag of beef jerky like he owned it. He rode the rest of the way stretched between us, an equal opportunity armrest. Adams City opened up in front of us in a way that felt like a kindness, soft hills, trees like our own private audience, A skyline that didn't make my shoulders climb toward my ears. The apartment we'd lined up fell through in a flurry of actually the owner's cousin needs it that made me want to laugh and cry at the same time. We spent a night on an air mattress at Adam's friend Dan's place, Pepper snoring with his feet running in dreams, and looked at 3 different apartments the next morning. The first smelled like old onions. The second had a window that looked directly into a cinder block wall. The third was on the second floor of a house with a porch that had seen a lot of summers and a landlady named Ruth who wore a cardigan even though it was 70 degrees. The living room had a bay window with a wood sill just wide enough to be a bench, and when the afternoon light came through the glass it made the dust in the air sparkle like it had planned this in trance all week. Dogs? I asked, keeping my voice level. As long as he's not a barker, she said, peering over her glasses at Pepper. Pepper sneezed again and wagged like he was saying he could keep a secret. We signed the lease at her kitchen table while she told us about her late husband's garden and how the tomatoes haven't tasted right since he passed, as if the soil itself had gone into mourning. Our wedding photo leaned against the wall next to a box of cookbooks. The ring sat in a plastic dish that had come free with takeout, looking perfect in its own unimportant cradle. We ate our first breakfast sitting on the floor, legs stretched out under the bay window, and burned the toast because the knob on the old oven is a liar. Pepper watched the butter melt with holy concentration. Adam put his hand on my ankle and all the glass shards from the last year rearranged themselves into something like a pattern. I started the new job on a Wednesday. The commute is a 2-lane that drifts past horse pastures and a farm stand with a chalkboard that always has a joke on it so bad it's good. The building is newer than the one I left, but someone had the sense to plant trees instead of throw money at landscaping that looks like corporate punctuation. My manager walked me around and said, "I'm glad you're here," like she had decided it weeks ago. I ate lunch outside under a maple with a sandwich Adam packed that had dill tucked into it like a surprise. When I got back to my desk, there was a small fern waiting with a note in Ruth's careful cursive, "For your window. Apartments should have plants." We had our first fight 3 nights in. It was the kind that would have metastasized into a weekend-long campaign in my last marriage, and here it was just a spark catching a piece of dry grass. I found 3 cabinet doors open in the kitchen, like a poltergeist had gotten bored halfway through a haunting. The sink was full. There was a constellation of coffee grounds around the machine. I had just spent the day learning a new software and my brain felt like a sponge that had been wrung out too hard. I snapped, sharp, fast, a little unfair. Adam went quiet in that way of his where he is trying to make space. He closed the cabinets, one by one, very gently, and then he turned around and said, "I am not the person who made your life small, but I am in this kitchen with you and I want to get it right." He'd left them open because he was trying to figure out whether there was a system to where things went and didn't want to get it wrong. The words hit me in the chest in a way that felt both painful and clean. I apologized. He did too. We cleaned the coffee grounds together and I labeled 2 shelves with painter's tape and we went to bed with nothing unresolved crackling behind the door. It felt like the first night I slept in high school after finally turning in the English paper I'd been avoiding for weeks. 2 days after that, a thick envelope arrived with my parents' return address forwarded in Ruth's stack of mail. I took it out to the porch with Pepper bumping my knee with his nose like he suspected I was about to need a comforting witness. The top letter had the emblem I've come to recognize without wanting to. Relief granted. The words were plain and governmental and I didn't need them to be anything else. My hands shook so hard I had to lay the papers in my lap to keep reading. I called my dad and put him on speaker while Adam sat on the steps below me, one hand on my calf like he knew I needed anchoring. My dad didn't say anything for a beat and then he cleared his throat in the way he does when he's trying not to cry and said, "That's my girl." I took the letters inside and taped the notice to the wall above the marriage certificate with blue painter's tape for now, because frames seem like a ceremonial step better taken on a Saturday. For the rest of the afternoon, every time I walked past those 2 pieces of paper, my body did the thing where joy shows up as a sudden, practical task. I straightened a pile, folded a towel, lined the shoes by the door like a row of boats. A small, heavy package arrived a week later with Agatha's handwriting on it. No return address beyond the city I used to live in. Inside were pieces of my old wedding china, but not as I remembered it. She'd turned it into a mosaic, set in a cement trivet that was roughly the size of a dinner plate. The pattern made a kind of starburst out from a curve of a blue flower I recognized from the original plate, and in the middle she'd set a smooth river rock with one word inked on it in her careful print, "Still." There was a note. I didn't know what to do with it until I understood you don't have to erase everything to start over. This felt right. I put it on the bay window and set the fern on top of it. In certain light, the broken edges caught the sun and threw it around the room like confetti. Adam's best friend came over with his wife on a Friday and brought a charcoal grill he insisted on leaving because the landlord likes fire pits too much, which I assume is code for the fact that Ruth once singed off her eyebrows and now bans anything with flames below eye level. We stood in the small patch of yard under a string of lights someone before us had left behind. The grill smoked like a responsible dragon. Dan told the story about Adam refusing to switch his seat at the bar for years because you never know if she comes back to town and checks the old places, and I watched Adam's ears go pink. I loved him in that moment with the same kind of simple ferocity I used to reserve for clean sheets on a Sunday afternoon. He made a toast to starting late but on time anyway. We ate corn with our hands and watched Pepper try to understand why the neighbor's cat could walk along the top of the fence like a gymnast while he, a dog of much greater moral fiber, could not. This is the last small thing, but it has its own weight. We were at the hardware store the morning after the grill night, arguing in low voices about whether the eggshell paint actually looks like eggshell or if it was named by someone who had only seen software eggs. Adam turned down the next aisle and came back with a frame. It was plain wood with a seam at the corner I could feel with my thumb. "It's the right size," he said, holding it up to my chest as if to measure dimensions I couldn't see. We took it home and put the marriage certificate in it. Then we went back the next day and bought a second one for the other letter. They hang next to each other now on the wall by the window, off level by a hair because the plaster behind them is old and stubborn and because I want to be able to look at them and remember that even things hung with care have a little wobble. The light hits them late afternoon and if you stand in the right place, the reflection puts two small, bright rectangles on the ceiling like little promises you don't have to squint to believe in. Today, Pepper finally found a sunspot he trusts enough to sleep in, dead center on the rug, legs up like he's surrendering to the day. Adam is at the sink washing coffee cups because the dishwasher makes a noise like a fork drawer falling down a flight of stairs and neither of us can focus when it's running. I start the job on Monday after next in the city where the trees look like applause. In the corner, the trivet is holding the fern in a tiny vase with a buttercup in it that Adam handed me this morning like it was the first flower anyone had ever seen. Every once in a while, one of us says married to the other like we're testing the acoustics, like maybe the word will sound different in a different room. It doesn't. It sounds like when the right key finally fits in the lock and turns. The first thunderstorm of the season came in like someone dragging a table across the upstairs floor at 3 in the morning. The power popped off with a sound like a swallowed hiccup. Pepper lifted his head, gave the room a deeply suspicious look, and then relocated his entire body weight onto my chest as if to save me from electricity. We watched the street turn the kind of silver that only happens when the rain falls hard enough to make its own light. Somewhere down the block a transformer did whatever a transformer does when it's tired of pretending it's invincible. The whole neighborhood sighed into dark. Ruth knocked on our door just after dawn. She had a candle in a jelly jar and a raincoat the color of a lime and an announcement. The basement was taking on water just a titch, which I've learned in Ruth speak can mean anything from a damp concrete smell to the Arkansas River. We put on the shoes we keep by the door for pretending we're outdoor people and followed her down the narrow stairs that feel like a test of trust. The basement had maybe an inch over the floor and a faint rainbow sheen from oil that might date back to someone's grandfather storing his mower down there. It smelled like pennies and old newspapers. The three of us formed a bucket brigade like we were in a children's book about community, Pepper supervising from the stairs with the expression of a judge who has seen better preparedness. There's a corner of the basement where the foundation makes a little alcove, and in it was a tin bread box I've been meaning to ask about since we moved in. It had Sunbeam painted on the side in a font that wanted to make breakfast feel like a lifestyle. The water had nudged it out, like the house was tired of keeping secrets. Ruth made this small noise, oh, that no one makes on purpose. She waded over to it and crouched like knees were still something she could trust. When she opened the lid, there was a plastic bag inside and inside that a bundle of letters tied with a shoelace. The bag had done its job too well. The rope marks from decades sat on the envelopes like faint tan bracelets. She ran her thumb over the top one like reading Braille and then she sat down on the bottom step and read, out loud, to the three of us and the ghosts. 1973. His handwriting. There were sentences about tomatoes, always the tomatoes, how the beefsteaks were sulking but the Romas were coming in with a work ethic. A paragraph about a lawnmower that coughed itself into truce. Ruthie, he'd written, I think you make the air better. She stopped then and put the letters in her lap and pinched the bridge of her nose like she was trying not to let everything leak. When she spoke again, she said, I thought I lost them when we redid the porch. He always said I kept everything. I've spent years not keeping this. We handed up buckets to each other until the water sounded less like a conversation and more like someone whispering from the corner. When the power came back, it came in arcs down the street, one house at a time, and people opened their doors to congratulate electricity like it was a neighbor's kid who made varsity. Ruth took her letters upstairs and, an hour later, there was a knock again. She stood there with a carpenter's pencil tucked behind her ear and said, You're having that backyard thing next weekend, yes? I'm bringing the tomatoes. And you're taking that table from the attic. It's stubborn and it should go to someone who can argue back. The table from the attic is oak with knees. We hauled it down the stairs in a way that probably shaved a year off my life and 3 off Adam's, and when we set it up under the string of lights that came with the yard it looked like it already knew what to do. Ruth ran a palm over the surface like a blessing. We got that at an auction when we were so poor the check bounced, she said, conspiratorially. They let us take it anyway. I made spaghetti the first night and we felt like people do on magazine covers, only poor and in love. Best combination I ever found. The plan for the backyard thing kept shape-shifting. First it was a housewarming, then someone said the word celebration, then it got narrowed back down to what felt right, a table, some coals, people we love showing up with whatever they made when the sink is full and the day is long. My parents drove up with a potato salad in a bowl that's probably been in photos of every birthday I've ever had. Dan arrived with an arsenal of condiments and the confidence of a man who once used a lighter and a soup can to keep a grill going in a rainstorm. Ruth appeared from her door like she'd simply walked through the hedge. She brought a platter of sliced tomatoes that tasted like someone remembered something important while they were growing. We had one guest I didn't expect. She came 10 minutes early and stood on the sidewalk like she was rehearsing leaving, a paper bag hugged to her ribs. I knew her before my brain caught up because there is a particular way a man's mother carries her jaw when she's taught him to stand it. Bill's mom didn't take a step onto our yard until I went to the gate. She said my name the way I imagine it looked on my birthday cake when I was 8, careful letters, white frosting smoothed by someone with patience and a spatula. She handed me the bag and said, "I'll go. I just wanted to put this where it belongs." Inside were recipe cards in 3 different handwritings, hers, his grandmother's, one I recognized as my own from a recipe I'd emailed her once in a fit of holiday optimism. The top card was Red Sauce Company, and it had a thumbprint of what might have been paprika and a note on the back that said, "Use the cheap wine." Trust me, tucked between the cards was a savings bond so old the paper had gone the color of tea, made out to me and Bill from a great-aunt who used to send us ornaments with our names spelled wrong. "I can't cash it," she said. "He doesn't deserve it. You'll do something good with it. And he's gone to a place for a while," she added in the tone that makes a whole life into a euphemism. "He asked me not to tell you. I am telling you because I want you to not worry." That was my part in the hurt. I took his side by taking no one's. "I'm sorry." Then she did the most human thing. She asked if she could pick a tomato. I said yes. She chose a small one with a red so honest it almost hurt to look at. She put it in her pocket like a worry stone and left before any of my people arrived. I stood on the porch with the paper bag against my chest and thought, this is what it feels like when an ending offers you a glass of water on its way out. The party didn't have speeches. It had Adam at the grill dousing a flare-up with salt like a backyard magician and my dad teaching Dan how to cut the corn kernels off the cob into a bowl without a confetti explosion, even though neither of them needed directions and both of them appreciated having something they could pretend to instruct each other about. Somewhere around dusk, Pepper located his calling. He made 3 laps around the yard schmoozing like a politician and then stopped dead, pointed at the fence, and did the earnest bark he reserves for very important information. On the other side was a small boy in dinosaur pajamas who had executed a prison break from the house behind us and gotten as far as the azalea. Ruth's neighbor, a single mom I'd seen pulling a stroller up her steps with her teeth set, came around the corner at a run. She had the look of someone 5 seconds into realizing exactly how long her life could be without joy and then getting it back all at once. We handed her son. She pressed her forehead to Pepper's forehead as if the rules of gratitude had changed species. "His name is Tommy," she said. "He's fast." We learned that truth 2 more times before she bought a lock for the gate and we dropped off a bag of latches and a key with a note, not a village person, but happy to audition. Work did the thing work does when it sees you breathing without supervision and decides to hand you a plant and a project. By the end of the month, I was running a small team through a pilot program I'd suggested in a meeting in the throwaway tone you use to hide the fact that your heart is out on the table wearing a name tag. On a Tuesday, my boss put a hand on the back of my chair and said, "You have good instincts. Go with them," and left me in the soft glow of that for the rest of the week. On Wednesday, I had coffee with a woman from another department who remembered me as the one with the tax thing because the world is smaller at company events than it is anywhere else. She wanted to pick my brain about putting together a financial literacy workshop for staff. I went home and pulled out the budget spreadsheet I built like a raft and realized that the thing I thought I might be ashamed of could be, in the right light, something useful. Adam, measuring shelves badly in the living room, said, "Imagine Bill seeing you stand in front of a room with a whiteboard about money, and there was no heat in it, just a sort of fond disbelief at how people are wrong about each other all the time and how we get to be evidence." The savings bond from the paper bag came through as a number so humble it made me love whoever bought it for thinking of patience as a gift. It had matured while we were busy breaking and got quietly bigger when no one was looking, like grief and basil. We used it to buy a second-hand piano I found online from a man who had the exact creativity haircut and the exact engineer shoes, and who stood in his driveway explaining how the right pedal sustains and the left makes things more soft like we were applying for custody. Adam played hard and soul disaster chords with the confidence of a person who believes their charm can carry a tune, and I played the little bit of Debussy my 10th grade fingers remember and we both pretended we weren't going to wake up at 2 in the morning and come out here like teenagers sneaking cookies. The piano is an upright with a scratch down the side where it probably argued a little with the door frame. Pepper likes to lay under it and let the sound roll over his ribs. I saw Agatha again by accident. There is a farmer's market 2 towns over on Saturdays that Ruth swears by for cucumbers that don't taste like a lecture. We went for dill and found a line of booths where artists had set up their corners of the world. At the third tent, there were mosaics that caught the light in a way that made you want to open all your windows. Little tables. Picture frames. A birdbath that looked like a congregation of tiny oceans. Agatha was wearing a bandana and no eyeliner and a look on her face like she finally knew where to put the fragile parts so they wouldn't fall off the shelf. She saw me and had to do this quick facial arithmetic that came out to a smile that didn't ask any questions. "I got into the community studio," she said, and then laughed at the ordinariness of saying it as if that didn't include 6-month wait lists and a woman at a general store who taught her grout like it was a second language. On the edge of her table, There was a small square trivet with pieces of a plate I swear I recognized not because it was mine but because it belonged in the family of the thing she sent me. The word in the middle, written on a tile intentionally left plain, was start. She and her sister are renting an apartment above a bakery. She's applying for a scholarship to take a night class. She told me all of this while I nodded like a metronome, and then she held out a hand for Pepper to sniff. "Hi, Peppery man," she said, and he leaned his entire head into her palm like he had gotten the same memo about second chances. We didn't know we wanted a ritual for ourselves until we had one. On Sunday mornings, after the market and the piano and the kind of sleeping that feels like someone answered something you forgot to ask, we get Ruth's tomato sauce going on that oak table and set the recipe card down where flour has already drawn a northern hemisphere on the wood. I read aloud the lines that are more instruction than anything spiritual and it still feels like church. Use the cheap wine. Trust me. Stir until your arm says enough. Put a spoonful of the water from the pasta into the sauce. It's what brings it all together. Starch is glue, science hiding in the sauce like a magician with his sleeves rolled up. Adam comes up behind me and rests his chin on the top of my head to peek into the pot because he is taller but also because he is a fundamentally nosy person about anything bubbling. We eat with both of us on one side of the table like we're hosting invisible guests on the other. There was one more thing, small in the way front doors are small compared to the houses they open into. The DMV gave me a number and a chair and a laminated sign that said no food or drink in all caps that I read while drinking water anyway, and I decided to change my name. Not to his. Not back to the one that made me a teenager in the mirror. I took my grandmother's. The one who wore trousers before that was a thing you didn't have to apologize for and made a living washing other people's curtains and once told my mother that a woman should have her own screwdriver and her own checking account and the knowledge of how both are useful. They hand you a new card like it's not a tiny ceremony. I sat in the car afterward and said the name out loud once, twice, like you're supposed to with babies so they come when called. It felt like setting a cup down in a cupboard where it fit better than anywhere else. When the first mail came with it on the envelope, Adam stuck it to the fridge with a magnet shaped like a tomato I bought at the market from a teenager who had painted vegetables that looked like they're mid-conversation. There's a silly pleasure in hearing someone at the pharmacy call your name and know you picked it on purpose. Last night, I woke up to a sound I couldn't place and then understood it was just happiness rearranging the furniture. The house sighed. The piano made one string's worth of noise like it was reminding itself it exists. Pepper got down from the couch, circled once, and flopped with the confidence of a creature who has chosen his humans well. I went to the kitchen for a glass of water and stood there looking at our wall, the two frames slightly askew, the note with Ruth's sauce ratios stuck there with painter's tape, the recipe card with the thumbprint that might be paprika, the magnet tomatoes having a gossip with the electricity bill. Adam came in and put his palm flat against my back like he was checking I was still here and said, in the quiet voice he uses for something serious or for the first minute of mornings, married. I said it back, and in the window, our reflections looked like an answer to a question I don't need to ask anymore. Outside, the maple threw late light against the ceiling in rectangles and the room looked like it had agreed to be kind.